mentioned that you arrived on scene and started interviewing witnesses, and that there were dozens of kids running around and parents showing up, correct? You were asked about whether or not there was any sign of any alcohol having been at this party. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you told us that there was maybe one bottle of whiskey in the yard?
I do remember seeing a bottle of whiskey.
And that was the only indication that you had that there was drinking going on at this party?
There wasn't alcohol cans all over the street or anything like that. There was alcohol in the house, but it's hard to differentiate what the parents own or where the kids were drinking it. No one had alcohol in their hands at that time.
And that was about half an hour to 40 minutes after the initial call came in at 11:54.
Maybe a little bit more at that point, after everything settled down.
So there was at least a bottle of whiskey in the yard.
Yes.
And then you say there was other alcohol that was in the house, but that was hard to determine who that belonged to exactly?
Yes.
And what was the other alcohol that you found in the house?
I don't recall.
Was there a lot of evidence of alcohol in the house?
I don't recall. You got to remember the focus was the stabbing that occurred, not alcohol by minors at that point.
Because that wouldn't be pertinent to trying to understand.
It would, and I do believe there are photographs of the interior of the house. I just didn't take them.
Did you see those photographs?
I don't recall.
And do you recall whether or not you ever saw evidence of large piles of Solo cups or any other indication that there was in fact a large amount of drinking going on at this unsupervised party?
I do not recall a large pile of Solo cups.
Do you recall any evidence of a large amount of drinking going on?
People's actions, the way they were talking to me, that was probably my biggest indicator.
And what were those actions that indicated that?
You could tell people are slurring their words. Their eyes are a little glossy. Just my training experience, I could tell someone's been drinking, especially a juvenile. But that would be my biggest. Like I said, I wasn't hunting for the underage drinking at that point because I had so much going on with the witnesses and the stabbing.
And that was done, again, to document apparent injuries that Mr. Valle had on him, correct?
Yes.
That's more than the standard booking photo that's taken of a person, correct?
Not everyone's booked for murder.
I beg your pardon?
It was a murder case, so if we saw someone, let's say, in an assault and they had apparent injuries, we would take photographs of them, more so than just the booking photo.
Standard to take a booking photo, correct?
Yes.
When you notice injuries that you want to document, then you take more photos
Yes.
of those injuries, correct?
Yes.
And that's what was done in this case,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Did Mr. Valle ask you to take those photos?
I do not know. I wasn't there.
And then you said that the investigation continued thereafter, correct?
Correct.
In fact, the investigation went on all summer long, did it not?
Yes.
And it continued, I think you told us, into the fall, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, really continued on into this year when we went and got some of these drone videos that you showed us earlier, right?
Yes.
Now, you told us that you located every attendee at that party. Is that correct?
Everyone that we know of.
Okay. So there are possibly people that you don't know of that were there, correct?
It's possible.
Because,
Objection has to possibly, it calls for speculation. I don't know what he would know.
I'll sustain so it was sort of a late objection, but you tried to make it. I'll sustain the objection. I will direct the jury to not, I'm going to strike the answer to the question asking if it was possible, if there were attendees who were not there, and the response, that's stricken. And you're not to consider that as evidence, all right? And you will get further detailed instructions about that during the court's final jury charge. Attorney Smith, you may proceed.
thank you, Your Honor. Throughout the course of your investigation, did you learn of individuals that were seen in cell phones that you weren't able to actually identify or talk to?
I do not believe so.
So you think that you've spoken to every person that was at that party?
I can't definitively answer that.
And you were describing for us a fight that occurred earlier that evening at 5 Lazy Brook. Do you recall that?
I do.
Where you learned that some attendees had gotten into a Honda Pilot, correct?
Correct.
And then you said that you interviewed everybody that was at that party, correct?
The same.
Again, you can't really tell us that you interviewed everybody that was there. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
But you did secure some video of a fight that took place in or near the garage of 5 Lazy Brook, correct?
Yes,
When did you secure that video?
I do not have the date. I don't have the date in my head.
Was it before or after you got the arrest warrant?
After.
And therefore, it was after you spoke with the people that had been interviewed prior to securing that arrest warrant.
Yes,
And then you also secured video from 43 Laurel Glen Drive, correct?
yes,
That was also subsequent to actually securing the arrest warrant, correct?
yes,
And that video, did that come from a Tanner Chernowski?
yes.
All right, that video, very important evidence in this case. Let's bring back in civil rights attorney Adante Pointer. These days, especially when you're talking about a situation with high schoolers, Adante, you're almost guaranteed to have video evidence, and that can be really important in a case like this where we know what happened, the outcome, but we don't know the why or the details leading up to it.
Absolutely. You know, video is everywhere. And as you mentioned, teens and young people in general are videotaping everything. And so it's likely that there is video, and we have one here in this case. That video is important because we've established now through the testimony that people are drinking. We all know that when people are drinking and intoxicated, they don't have the best memories, especially young people. But on top of that, when you have potential criminal charges and it's a chaotic scene and there's blood and people are injured and hurt, people's memories can certainly fade or be skewed in one direction in terms of how they perceived what happened and what their involvement is, and then who supposedly committed the act. So the alcohol is important, video is important because video doesn't lose its memory, it's not biased, and it's something that could be pulled up and shown to a jury in order for them to understand the context of what took place.
You mentioned some of the things before we heard this cross-examination that they'd be asking about the different witnesses and what all they have to say. And this witness said that he did not know, couldn't recall if he's talked to every person who was at that party. But let's take a look at the injuries, because you mentioned that as well, that the injuries could play a role in favor of the defense. And this witness said that he actually showed those or made sure that all of those photographs were taken. Here's a look at some of them that were put into evidence. What are your thoughts on the injuries in this case?
Well, you know, I think a jury is going to sit there and say, look, the injuries that we see documented here in these photographs, are they in proportion, or do they lend itself to the idea that this was a person who was in a fight for their life, that they were being attacked, that they were being jumped, that they had to pull a knife in order to defend themselves? And frankly, the injuries look a little light, but at the same time, you know, we also know that bruising and stuff like that, it changes its colors, it changes the look, and these pictures are taken not at the time where the injuries actually happened. So he's not bleeding, he doesn't have those type of gory injuries that you might be more willing to accept that he had to stab people to defend himself. So I think the injuries certainly help, but they're not the type of injuries, in my opinion, that'll sway a jury to the position of saying, hey, this was a person who was in a fight for his life and he had no choice but to stab someone.
You know, you say stab people, that's just a reminder. There are 4 victims here. I'm sure these surviving ones are going to be taking the stand in this case, but the sheer number here really adds to the Commonwealth's case. But let's talk about the age factor. He's 16 years old at the time. The victim is 17 years old. These are all teenagers inside of this home. Does age factor in when we're in the guilt portion, or is that something that jurors will more so consider if they are handling the sentencing side, which also may be handled by the judge?
Yeah, unless there's some expert testimony that comes in to talk about how a young person of 16 years old might have some misperceptions of threats, might not necessarily be in the best state to make sound decisions under intoxicated and things of that nature, I don't think it's going to play much in the way the jury determines whether or not he's guilty of stabbing someone. However, it could definitely play into the sentencing phase as mitigating circumstances to say, look, this was a young person, 16 years old, intoxicated, other people were intoxicated, and that may cut against such a steep sentence. But once again, 4 victims and 1 is dead, that could easily add up to a long amount of time.
Adante Pointer, thank you so much for your legal analysis this hour. We have to get in a break, but when we come back, more Valle testimony inside of that Connecticut courtroom. And Ted Rollins is joining us. We have an update in the case of Karen Reed. You're watching Court TV, your front row seat to justice.